Records of service. We're going to piggyback off of Saito's route to do Chizuru's. So this is chapter 4, November 1867. Oh man. Actually, I might not. Well, we've seen Citus before, so there's really not much for me to read then in that case. So, November 1867. Alright, begin the story from this chapter. We get to pick who we do, which we need Saito. And we're doing it on low romance. There we go. Chapter 4, November 1867. Hajime Saito, romance low. Yep. And this time I am going to press the mash button. And what we're going to do is we decided to stay home. I'll stay here. Chapter 5 yet? So I'm going to read this whole thing. Unless it seems we've just saw. December 1867. As the order to begin imperial restoration came, Sacho troops started occupying the city of Kyo. At the same time, members and affiliates of the Tokugawa shogunate were being removed from the imperial palace and eventually Kyo altogether. They, as expected, did not take this lightly. In response, the shogunate military forces were beginning to march from Edo to Kyo. As tensions rose from the approaching shogunate armies, the Sacho were preparing their own forces for a hostile confrontation. The situation was growing increasingly frenzied. As the shogunate scrambled to call upon their remaining allies, the Shinsengumi received an order to come to the Fushimi magistrate. Having all of their men and armaments gathered in the Fushimi magistrate enabled the shogunate to act in the event of an emergency, so off we went. On one such day, during the commotion...
Oi, 大変だ! 近藤局長が何者かに狙撃されたぞ!
Bad news was delivered to the Fushimi magistrate. There had been no witnesses and the culprit escaped unseen. Their motives could only be guessed.
ふざけんじゃねえ! 誰が撃ちやがったんだ! 行くぞ! 手の空いてるやつは俺についてこい!
Nagakura got a crew of warriors together and they all headed towards the location where Kondo-san was shot. Kondo-san's gunshot wound was on his right shoulder. We have seen this. We just seen this scene. December 20th, 1867. It was decided that, yeah, we've seen this. We haven't seen this! It was a cold December morning when Kondo-san and Okita were sent to Osaka Castle. I was performing the final check on everyone's belongings when Hijikata-san had called upon me. I grew almost sick with worry. Had something happened to Kondo-san and Okita? I slowly made my way to Hijikata-san's room as the potential scenarios played out in my head. In the common room, Hijikata-san sat, waiting for me. Because of how the last few days had played out, Hijikata-san always seemed to wear a grave expression. The absence of Okita and Kondo-san seemed to break the heart of Hijikata-san silently, but assuredly. Knowing he was dealing with so much, I did my best to listen to any request Hijikata-san may have had. I was hoping to be of service right beside Hijikata-san. However, what Hijikata-san had revealed to me proved that this was not the case.
すまねえ。近藤さんと宗司と共に大坂城に行ってほしい。
That was the complete opposite of what I'd wanted. True, I was quite concerned about Kondo-san and Okita, and at one point I even entertained the idea of possibly heading to Osaka Castle with them. But since Matsumoto-sensei was already at Osaka Castle, all I wanted to do was care for things around here and do my best to play my part with everyone else. Thinking about all of the duties, including making the warriors' meals and tending to the wounded, I truly hoped this was the time I could show my worth to everyone by helping those in need. I looked up at Hijikata-san, and although I was shaking, I mustered the courage to speak my mind. May I ask you one thing? Are you sending me to Osaka Castle because you think I'd be in the way during the war? Hijikata-san's face remained stern, and he did not seem to be offended by the forwardness of my question, but he just shook his head and closed his eyes.
お前はよくやってくれているし、叶うならここにいてほしいと思ってる。だがな、お前を生かせる理由は個人的な頼みだ。俺が信用できるやつにあの二人のことを任せたい。頼む、大坂城に行ってくれないか。
Hijikata-san trusts me. He wanted me to look after them. And he even said please to me. My heart fluttered at the sound of his words. If me going allows you to enter the battlefield without worry, then yes, I will go.
ありがとうよ。二人を頼む。
Hijikata-san nodded from the curtness of my response, and he answered with full confidence. I had known that the Fushimi magistrate would become a battleground in the case of the Satsuma or Choshu were to strike. I wasn't in any position to help them, or even watch the fighting take place. Everyone, please be safe. Deep in my stomach, I felt a pang of reluctance as I left Kyo for Osaka Castle. As soon as we arrived in Osaka, Kondo-san and Okita were brought to Matsumoto-sensei for examination. However, the results brought both good and bad news to us. The good news involved Kondo-san's recovery. We had been informed that Kondo-san's injury was not life-threatening, and we were just waiting for the shattered bones to heal in a line. Okita, however, was less fortunate news from the results of his exam. The tuberculosis had begun to eat away at his lungs, and he was given a solitary room in the castle to recuperate. As I watched after the two of them, we had welcomed the New Year's celebration. A large battalion of troops were marching from Edo, and they passed Osaka Castle, later trekking through the Toba Highway, headed towards Kyo. Upon bearing witness to the sheer number of soldiers heading to Kyo, it seemed to convince us all that the Satsuma and Shoshu would surrender. If such news were true, then perhaps we could return to Kyo faster than we expected. January 1867. January 1868 is actually the correct thing. Oh my god. War between the shogunate and the Sacho troops erupted, causing my wistful thinking to come to an abrupt and depressing halt. Without knowing what exactly set the war in motion, I had heard cannons and gunfire in the direction of Kyo. No one thought to give someone like me any updates. And I was told that war had finally broken out, and I spent each and every day in worry alone. During the afternoon of the 5th of January, the castle had rumbled with commotion. The shogunate troops were allegedly pushed back and then retreated from Kyo in the direction of Fushimi. Does that mean the shogunate had lost? When I tried to pry answers from people in the castle, no one knew any details. Everyone seemed too busy thinking about how this affected themselves. Eventually, the men of the Shinsengumi began coming to the castle, one after another. I did my best to welcome the men of the Shinsengumi, despite all of them looking worn and dejected. Their familiarity with me meant they could share the bad news. The Satsuma and Choshu were victorious. My concern for the safety of the men still fighting out there grew exponentially as I heard the sad news. Inoue had died in war, and Yamazaki-san was critically injured. Aside from them, many of our other warriors were killed as well. From what everyone had been telling me, before they knew what was what, now the Sacho forces were appointed as imperial court troops. As soon as Yoshinobu Tokugawa, who led as the supreme commander of the shogunate, heard this, he left the castle on a ship to Edo, fearing retribution as an enemy of the new emperor. Even though I was at the castle during the same time as him, I had no idea any of this had occurred. Now the domain who used to assist the shogunate troops were under the jurisdiction of the Sacho forces, and were now imperial troops. Under these trying times, it was growing difficult to justify continuing the war while holding the castle, so the remaining men here retreated to Edo. As for the Shinsengumi, they had been given orders to cease fighting, so like the rest of the shogunate troops, they were forced to retreat to Edo. Amidst the confusion, I was tasked with treating the wounded men who had returned to the castle. After most of the men were back, I was able to see Hijikata-san. His body was noticeably thinner, almost emaciated, since I had last seen him at the Fushimi magistrate. I couldn't blame him. We had lost the war, and many of his comrades died out there. No words of comfort came readily for me to give. However, it seems as though Hijikata-san read through my concerns, and he approached me first.
近藤さんと掃除のことを任せっぱなしにしてすまなかったな。お前も聞いていると思うが、薩長軍が朝廷軍になってこっちの総大将が尻尾巻いて逃げちまった。こんな状況じゃ戦を続けたくてもできやしねえ。俺たちも江戸に戻ることになった。だがこれで終わりじゃねえ。江戸に戻ったら将軍と幕府を説き伏せて薩長軍との戦の続きをするつもりだ。
At first, Hijikata-san came off as a little critical of himself, but towards the end, his powerful words showed that the Shinsengumi still had a future. When Hijikata-san heard my response, he nodded happily.
それでな、お前に一言伝えておかなきゃならないことが。江戸に戻ったら、俺たちから離れてしばらくお前の家にいてくれないか。
Oh.
そこで戦が終わるのと高堂さんが帰るのを待っていてくれ。
Hijikata-san's sudden request made me freeze. I didn't know what to do. Why am I the only one who gets to go home? Why am I the only one who gets to go home when the Shinsengumi was going through so much? No, yet again, it was only me. What? But I want to be with you guys. I understand I'm not an official warrior, but I thought, at least, that I was a member. I thought it was your page, Hijikata-san. Unlike our last encounter of Fushimi, Hijikata-san couldn't bring himself to look back at me. That was probably because I was asking him to give me a reason neither of us wanted to hear. Once the order was said aloud, I knew that I couldn't go against his wishes. I didn't even notice that Hijikata-san had walked up to me and stood as closely as he had been, and he placed his hands tenderly on my shoulders. His voice was more gentle and kinder than usual, and he put forth effort to convince me.
お前をずっと置いといてやりたかったが、そうもいかなくなった。俺たちは武士だから、今度こそ城を枕に討ち死にする覚悟で薩長と戦うつもりだが、お前は女だ。そうもいかねえだろ。お前を源さんや山崎のような目に合わせたくない。分かってくれ。
For a moment, I didn't answer or look up. Hijikata-san calmly patted my back a few times, and he walked off without another word. It took everything inside of me to refrain from turning back, or even responding to Hijikata-san. My eyes welled with uncontrollable tears. All I could do was bid farewell to the shadow as I walked off. January 9th, 1868. The Shinsengumi were getting on the steamboat provided by the shogunate for the return to Edo. I separated from Hijikata-san and the other men, and I came aboard the Fujiyama Maru, along with Kondo-san, Okita, and the other injured. A few days after the ship had set sail, Yamazaki-san, who had been suffering and fighting through his grave injuries, passed away beside the Kishu Sea. Watching a close friend die in person made me finally understand where Hijikata-san was coming from. I assumed this was the beginning of what could be a long, painful chapter for the Shinsengumi. Hijikata-san's request for me to leave meant that I would be involved in none of it as it unfolded. 4 years had passed since I'd come to Kyo, and I'd shared many memories with the Shinsengumi. As I held these memories in my heart, I prayed for everyone's wishes to come true and for their safety. I prayed that when all of this was over, that I could see all of them once again. I looked up at the sky towards the west, forever and ever.